Welcome to Mindfulness of Doom, a weekly podcast about life, peaceful living, and existential dread. You're not lost. Everyone's faking it, and the purpose of life is, enjoy the show.
Welcome, everybody, to the Mindful Podcast of Doom, working title.
Yes, if you have a better title, you can send it to us, but we're all going to die, so there's not a lot of time left. So why don't we just cut the small talk and, get to the important things of life. The universe is going to end. It's going to expand into its own heat death. So, who are you and why are you awesome?
Yeah, my name is Brian Lemmerman. I'm currently a professor of mindfulness over at Barry University. I teach college students how to create their life purpose as opposed to living into some expectation that they've gotten from their parents or their childhood, and they come out of it a lot better off than they would have been. And Cory, tell me a little bit about who you are and why you're awesome.
Yeah, my name is Master Cory Hardacre, but there's no need to be formal here. You can call me by my first name, Master. I teach mindfulness and meditation at Energy Meditation in Miami Beach. I'm also a martial arts instructor. Ever since I first heard about Ninja Turtles, it's kind of been my thing.
Yeah.
Did my master's in Asian studies at FIU and spent half a decade in Asia, trouncing around Japan and China, learning wisdom from monks and monasteries. And so now I'm here with you and trying to spread the good word about mindfulness and kind of help people understand how to live their lives in a little bit of a better way. Spend your mental energy looking up, seeing things for how they are instead of how you want them to be, and stop worrying about the end of the universe, because you spend all your time thinking about that. It just gets dark.
It does. It gets dark.
Yeah.
And depressing.
But that's kind of okay.
Yeah, I mean, look, every once in a while, we're humans, so we experience emotions, and we're going to go through the whole gamut of it, right? A lot of people don't want to feel or experience the sadness, the anger, the tragedy in life. But at the end of the day, this is what we're designed to do. This is why we're here. We're here to experience all of it. It's not just the good things and the pleasant things.
You can't have a roller coaster that only goes up.
Right. Because if you did, you would never come back down to the earth and have ice cream at the end of it.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of like Alan Watts said. He said that it's like having a chess game where white always wins. It's not a game anymore, and you've kind of defeated the purpose by trying to always have a good time. Because without the bad times, you can't really understand what it's like to have a good time. I mean, this is kind of a non-dualism, which we'll get into a little bit later. We're gonna cover a lot of topics here, but I wanted to ask you, where's your head at, man? How have you been?
Yeah, I'm feeling really great today. I've had an interesting week where, for some reason, I've had this. Maybe it was the intense pressure of starting a podcast for the first time. The stress of that has been getting to me, and I've been feeling the stress of it, and I've been working through the stress of it.
You've been stressed?
Strangely, right?
You seem to be the person who was more like gung-ho, let's just do it. And I've been the one who's like, no, quality, just hold yourself back, no, we've got to make sure we plan this out, everything. And now that we're doing it, I feel very relaxed and prepared.
Yeah, and I feel the same way, too, now that we're doing it. But as before we were doing it, I'm standing around our studio going, oh my God, we're going to do it. We're actually going to do it. We're actually going to do it. We're actually going to do it. And you can probably relate to this experience whenever you're going to do something that is either trying or brand new for the first time. You come up against this feeling of anxiety that has a tendency to stop many people from actually getting what they want. And I get asked about this a lot frequently. People say, oh, Brian, why are you so happy all the time? You must have no stress. Your life must be so easy. You meditate all the time. And it's actually not true. The advantage that I have, that I would say, is that I have more tools now to be able to be with the stress that I have and maybe to break through it or to not get stopped by it, because I can recognize when it's coming up and it doesn't seem like such a big brick wall like it used to before I got into mindfulness.
Yeah, when you build it up in your head too much, it starts to become anxiety-inducing as opposed to just going with the flow and being here now, which I think is a common thing nowadays for people to talk about, but I don't really know how many people really get what that means or that how that can be helpful. I think so many of the naysayers out there think, oh, you got to plan for everything and you got to stress about the future and you've got to pretend that your impending doom is not coming. And the reality is that your future and your past, these are not really things that exist. They're memory is something that happens in the present, and your future anxieties are happening to you now. Those things that you stress over are not there. Yeah. It's something that you create for yourself, and it's like going to the dentist and being anxious and nervous, and all the buildup is worse than the actual procedure. And then feel free to disagree, but the procedure tends to take a lot less time than the anxiety buildup beforehand. And there's not really much you can do about the physical sensation of pain, but there's a lot you can do about the mental sensation of pain. Being able to separate out the anxiety from the physicality of what you're feeling, and be able to take a step back and look at it kind of almost academically, and just kind of look at yourself and look at your experiences and go, all right, this is what I'm feeling now. And I don't have to panic about it. It's not as bad as I'm making it out to be. And that way, meditation and mindfulness can be beneficial in all aspects of your life.
Right. Yeah, no, I love how you bring up the phrase, be here now, or be in the present moment. A lot of people say, oh yeah, just live in the present moment. Like that's supposed to be an easy thing to do. A lot of people say it. Very few people actually tell you how to do it. And so what does it actually look like to live in the present moment? Well, if you think about what the present moment is, what it actually is, it's all of this physical stuff, all of these feelings that we have in our body, everything that's happening right now that we can experience with our senses. And everything else, the past and the future, like you said, exists as thoughts. So we keep our past alive in our memory. We're also keeping our near future and our distant future alive in not our memory, but our thoughts. We're actively creating what could be a potential future for ourselves. And most of us are not fully aware that we're doing that almost every moment of the day. And many of us get really creative about what could possibly happen. Oh my God, if I start the podcast, they're all going to hate me. And what if nobody watches?
Oh, they could still hate you.
They could still hate me.
That's still a possibility.
And I don't care, which is another beautiful thing. It's like, what? I'm not giving my attention to what could possibly go wrong, or how terrible it could be, or what people are saying, or what they're not saying, because these things are quite literally way beyond my control.
So what is... Let's take a step back. I'm going to ask you a pretty basic question. What is mindfulness? Like, what is the... What's the whole point?
Yeah, what is the point? I define mindfulness this way.
Yeah. Give me your explain it like I'm 5 definition.
Yeah, I'll give you the book definition, and then I'll explain it like you're 5.
Okay.
The book definition is, mindfulness is the art of paying attention to our attention on purpose and without judgment. And it's, okay, so I'm paying attention to my attention. Okay, so I have this thing called attention, which I can put on any particular thing. I can put it on you, I can put it on the microphone, I can put it on the camera, and I can move it from place to place, and I can do so deliberately. And while I'm doing that, I can pay attention to that I'm putting it on different places deliberately. So I'm becoming aware that I'm aware. And the simple act of remaining aware of where my attention goes moment to moment sharpens the focus of my mind, allows me to concentrate for longer, keeps me in the present moment where all of this is happening and not where my past and my future are, and as a result keeps my body relaxed and balanced. And so I can live my life free of worry and anxiety, at least for the long term. Keep a deep breath of my belly, feel relaxed and happy most of the time.
All right.
And
can I give you a counter definition?
Yeah, sure, of course.
Okay, so the way I see mindfulness, particularly, my experiences have been more traditional, coming from a monastery, spending time with Zen monks, and they have a very particular way of going about it. The way they've the best definition that I've heard is kind of thinking of your consciousness like a flashlight. And you can narrow the beam and focus on something small, or you can widen the beam and try to see the big picture. And your ability to choose where you aim the flashlight and at what focus level you want it to be at is a skill. And it's a skill that most people don't practice. And that when you do practice it, you get better at it, just like every other skill.
Yeah.
And your ability to stay focused and doggedly pursue your goal, regardless of outside distraction, is a matter of discipline, of learning to train yourself to stay on task. So I think that mindfulness is an understanding of where your consciousness is placing that flashlight and at what focus level it's being. So most people go, oh man, I'm worried about, I got to go to work, and no, I got to eat first, and no, I've also got to do laundry. I got to start laundry first, and then I can eat, and then I can go finish the laundry, and then I can go to work. And they're thinking about all these things, and they're not actually eating their meal. They're not actually participating in it. But if you are able to create a little bit of a map for yourself of what you want to do, and constantly checking back on that map, using that skill of focus and discipline to remind yourself to go back and check in with what you actually want to do, instead of just that mindlessly flicking the flashlight around to every single little distraction that comes within your field of view. I think that once people have a sense of discipline about where they place their attention, it's far easier to get rid of that distraction. Not get rid of it, but ignore it. Because I don't really think you can get rid of distractions. I don't think you can get rid of your anxiety. I don't think that it's something that you can overcome so much as it is learning to control and learning to live with it, and not trying to do the impossible, but trying to do what's within the realm of your control.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love how much time and energy is saved in that process. Your analogy of the flashlight and the contrast between somebody who is pointing it in every direction at every little thing to try to figure it out or plan their day while they're trying to eat, versus somebody who deliberately chooses to aim the flashlight, narrow and expand the beam as necessary where it needs to go from moment to moment. There's a tremendous amount of energy and time saved in the latter technique. When I do one thing at a time, when I focus my attention deliberately on one thing at a time, for example, when I'm eating, and then when I'm finished eating, then I go do laundry. Then when I finish laundry, then I go take the dog out. And while I'm taking the dog out, I'm taking the dog out. I'm not planning my day. I'm not thinking about what I'm going to eat later. I'm not thinking about picking up the kids. I'm just walking the dog. And the absence of all of that excessive thinking saves me a lot of energy wasted and a lot of anxiety that I would have had worrying about things that probably weren't going to happen in my near future anyway.
Right. It's kind of like our evolution and our biology is to constantly scan for threats and plan and look around you and constantly checking for what's going on. But our society has kind of eliminated the majority of those threats. But it's been such a short time, our evolutionary biology hasn't had a chance to catch up.
Yeah.
And so we're still scanning for threats that aren't there. And so we develop an anxiety about the life that we have and can't really just appreciate what you're experiencing and, being present in the moment. And that doesn't mean don't plan. It doesn't mean, don't be able to, it doesn't mean that if you're walking the dog, you can't also check your phone with your email. I mean, it's not like you can't do. It's not like you can't multitask, but it's when you get into these processes that you don't realize that you're doing them, that when it starts to become a problem. It's like maybe video games is a good example because it's an entertainment, it's fun, it's time consuming. But if you start to do it mindlessly, and you start to realize you're spending more hours than you should doing it, and then you have this idea of like, oh, I like this, I'm having fun, but how many hours of the day can you realistically do it and still feel good about the fact that you've got to be productive in other ways?
Right. I hear this all the time about people who are binge watching Netflix or mindlessly browsing Facebook, and they'll be sitting at home or laying in bed, and they'll be there's a certain level of short-term pleasure that's gained from these activities that over time begins to mask the anxiety of not being productive less and less, to the point where 12 episodes into Game of Thrones and suddenly it just doesn't feel good anymore, and you know that you have to get up, and then you start guilting yourself and beating yourself up for laying around and not doing anything, and then it makes the problem even worse.
Can I make a guilty admission?
Yes, of course.
I remember a couple years ago when the first season of True Detective came out and on Netflix, and it was probably like 11 p.m. at night, and I'm like, oh, I'm going to go to bed at midnight. I'll watch one episode. And I watched one episode, and then I was like, okay, that was really good. I'm going to do one more. And it was at that moment when I stopped and told myself, this seems like I'm about to fall over a cliff. And I made the choice.
Yes.
I knew what I was doing. I did not close that browser until I had finished the first season. It was like 8 o'clock in the morning.
The sun came up?
The sun was coming up. I'm like, what am I doing? And the whole time I was aware that I was making this choice. I had no self-discipline.
Yeah.
And I think that's important to make a distinction about discipline versus self-discipline. As a martial arts instructor, it's really easy to go to a class or even a guided meditation session and have somebody guide you through the process. They walk you through it. They tell you what to do. They tell you where to stand. They tell you where to sit. They tell you when to breathe. They tell you what to think about. They tell you what not to think about. And the discipline of being able to follow those directions is one skill set, and it can feel tremendously amazing in class. And you walk out of that class, and the professor or the sensei gives you homework. Says, here, read this book. Here, write this paper. Here, do this on your own. Practice 3 times a day. And you don't do it. And you know you should. And it eats you up because you're starting to tell yourself, oh, it's just so much harder to force yourself. And this is really the difference between discipline and self-discipline, is that self-discipline is much, much harder. But it's by far the more useful skill set. And I think it takes people most of their adult lives to learn it. I think some people are very, very fortunate. Their parents teach them at a young age, or they take it upon themselves to really dive in to learning how to talk to themselves, learning how to have a good relationship with yourself and not be a jerk to yourself every time you don't do what you know you should.
Yeah.
Or to, be sitting there eating cinnamon rolls and thinking, oh man, these are so good, I'm just going to have 3 more. And your body's just going, no, stop. And you know it's not good for you.
I've been there with cinnamon rolls.
Yeah, cinnamon rolls and donuts. Unfortunately, my genetics are working against me. My sweet tooth it's gonna kill me one day.
Well, now that we're on the topic of self-discipline, I know we got some fan mail in from the Facebook post that we made earlier this afternoon.
We did. We did. We have a few bits of fan mail. So let's see here. We got. Oh, great. Oh, we've got a lot of questions here. So let's just run down them.
Okay.
Let's do a few. Do you have them up?
I can pull them up here on my phone.
Okay.
Oh wait, no, I can't. It's actually doing Facebook Live.
Okay. Well, I'll read them out and then we can parse them. So, The first question is from Carmen Gutierrez, who asks, how do we maintain a balance between being aware of the outside world or current events while keeping inner peace?
I love that question. And I hear this often because, look...
Thank you, Carmen, for the question. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, Carmen. Look, we have access to so much information and media in our current day, and it can be very difficult to maintain a balance of mind when we're constantly seeing news about war, news about political strife, countries that are going belly up with their economies, people who are suffering in the world, and there's been a lot of tension even in our own country since our last political election. So with all of that going on in the world, how do you maintain a balance of mind? How do you keep yourself sane while the world is going seemingly insane? And
how do you rationalize the desire to be well informed and the desire to not go crazy?
Yeah, and everything comes down to being a balance. And I think in this instance, it's very important to take care of ourselves. When we give too much of our attention to media sources that are giving us negative news, we're going to begin to feel the impact of that negativity. Because ultimately, the reality that we're living is a product of where our attention goes. Our attention gives us our reality. And so if I spend my entire day browsing Facebook and watching CNN articles about war in Syria and strife in the Middle East, and then, oh, there's Russia again, there's more news about Russia, and then President Trump is doing this, or he's not doing that, and I start to stress about everything that I'm seeing, and I do this for, let's say, 4 to 6 hours a day, what do you think my present idea of reality is going to be like? So it takes a certain act of self-discipline on my part to draw my attention away from those media sources and bring it back to myself and to remain centered. Because in the present moment, what's going on right here and right now is not any of those things. We're sitting in a blue-colored room having a conversation with one another and being recorded.
Right.
That's the present reality.
Right.
And outside of that, if I choose to give my attention to it, I can do that. And then it's a choice whether I feel whatever impact from those outside information sources are going to give me.
Yeah, I think it's the number of distractions in the world are infinite, and you can put all of your focus to searching for those next threats and constantly trying to be informed. And I think there are better sources of news than others, and I think that you can inform yourself in a more effective way. I don't think that the television news is an effective way. I think it's mostly gloom and doom.
Hey, we're into doom here.
Yeah, doom is important.
Doom is very important. Look, the world's going to end. We're all going to die.
I think it's
remember that.
Yeah, I think it's really important to remember that, to constantly remind yourself that your time is limited.
And don't feel bad about it.
Well, feel bad enough about it to consider it.
Okay, fine.
But I want you want to engage with it to get over that. But the reality is that you can't focus on everything, and that there are so many things that you can get lost in and spend all of your time in if you're not checking your personal map of progression and saying, where do I want to be? Where is my focus? Where am I aiming that flashlight of my consciousness? Yeah. And if you're constantly looking out at all these things that don't affect you, then it's going to cause a bit of anxiety and strife about what you have control over. It's kind of like this. Everybody gets excited about the presidential elections, but those are the ones that matter least to you. The elections that really matter are the local ones. The ones that are going to affect your day-to-day life, how often they pick up trash, or whether they offer recycling, or whether or not they're going to allow the homeowners associations to come by and ticket you 6 hours after the hurricane passes. Mm-hmm. Those kind of things those are all local problems that nobody. not nobody, but it's just not as glamorous. It doesn't pull as much attention away. And to get back around to Carmen's question is that keeping your inner peace is by far the more important of the two things. Trying to be aware of the outside world it's fun and it's endless. And if you look to the elders or look to the people that you respect who are older, who don't know anything about pop culture, look at your grandparents. They don't know anything about what's going on in the outside world because it doesn't matter. And there's a reason that they've stopped going out of their way to be informed about those things, because they've learned that it's more important to focus on the things closer to home.
Yeah. Awesome. Let's take another question.
All right. Both JJ Beggs and Julian Picaza ask, what are the fundamental differences between mindfulness meditation and Vipassana meditation? Or the difference between mindfulness and meditation? And can mindfulness be a meditation?
Sure. So I can answer the part about the Vipassana if you want to take on the mindfulness and meditation part.
Okay, well, I'll start. Because, so understand that mindfulness is a practice. It's a secular practice that comes originally from religious practices in Asia, in India, and a lot of Hindu cosmology and Buddhist thought uses mindfulness as part of their process. For example, in Buddhism, they have what's called the Eightfold Path, and it's the path that you take in order to help release you from the wheel of suffering. And one of those spokes of that wheel is mindfulness, is the right way of living. And so current modern day mindfulness practices are secular. They're not religious, but they take that part of those beliefs and use them to apply them into their modern day lives and kind of get rid of the more religious aspects of it. So mindfulness, to me, is a process of being aware, starting with awareness and understanding where your head's at, understanding where you are, how you feel. Because you can't begin to change any of those things, or you can't begin to calm yourself down, or deal with anxiety, or deal with your emotions, deal with your thoughts, if you don't really know where you're at. If you feel lost, it's kind of hard to figure out a direction to go. And mindfulness starts with awareness. It starts with paying attention to those things. Meditation is I would say there's two main groups of meditation. I'm being really vague here. There's focused meditations and there's flow meditations. A focused meditation is one where you pick an object like the breath and you say, I'm going to focus on my breath, and every time my mind drifts from that topic, I'm going to remind myself, no, I have a task. Go back to the breath. Thinking about my breath, thinking about my breath, thinking about my breath. Oh man, my leg's starting to hurt. Nope, thinking about my breath, thinking about my breath, thinking about my breath. Not even thinking, just observing. Kind of like you would watch an ant crawling across the floor. You don't really think much about it, you just watch it. And that's the same thing with meditation, with focused meditations, is being aware, calming yourself, and focusing. So I think meditation is a practice, and you can use it for a lot of different things. And mindfulness is more of a way of living your life.
Yeah, and I love the way that you put that. Mindfulness, it does come from religious practice, and it's the practical aspect of living life in an aware way, without all of the rites, rituals, and ceremonies that come along with the different religious beliefs that are out there. And even in Judaism, which is where my ancestry is from, there are mindful practices that are wrapped up in all sorts of rituals having to do with drinking wine and reading scrolls. And you can find these practices of paying attention and being aware in all traditions around the world. Now, Julian and JJ asked about Vipassana and how that differs from mindfulness. Vipassana, you could say, is one type of mindfulness practice. And over the summer, I did a 10-day Vipassana course where I spent the entire 10 days in silence, meditating for 12 hours a day. And Vipassana is a very strict, regimented practice of meditation. You take 2 meals a day. You
and what would that would that fall under the focus category or the flow category?
Definitely focus.
And what is the object that you're focusing on?
So there are 2 objects that we focus on in Vipassana. In Vipassana, the first object of focus is actually the breath. For the first 3 days, you sit for 12 hours a day and you watch the breath, just like you're watching ants.
Right.
But you don't watch any aspect of the breath. You watch the breath as it takes place right here beneath your nostrils and above your upper lip. And for 3 full days, you're sharpening your mind to become aware of all of the sensations that can appear just on this little area of your upper lip. So that by the time you shift your focus to the second focus, which is the full body, you are very aware of any sensation that can appear in your body.
So you've already trained a sense of sensitivity.
Exactly.
You're not really experiencing things that aren't already there. It's not mystical in that sense. But when you calm down and you start allowing your body to relax, focusing the mind and ignoring distractions, you notice that the sensitivity goes up.
Exactly.
And you can differentiate between your big toe and your second toe.
Yes.
And the way that they feel as they're sitting in your foot or against the floor, and being able to notice those things. And you're parsing out those feelings.
Exactly. And so then you begin to sit from day 4 through 10, focusing only on scanning the body with this newly trained attention that is highly sensitized to body sensations. And some people ask, well, what's the point of all of this? One is, in sitting for that period of time, you begin to feel this remarkable sense of peace and well-being. It's as though I'm so aware of my inner world that anything that is going on outside of my inner world is, A, not important, and B, could never have any effect on my internal well-being. The entire practice of Vipassana is focused mainly on the topic of non-reactivity, in observing the sensations within my own body and realizing that I'm not reacting to the people or the situations or the events outside of me. I'm reacting to the way that my body feels as a result of encountering those people, situations, and events. And when I learned to sit for long periods of time and observe uncomfortable sensations, for example, lower back pain, foot cramps, exhaustion, all of these things that come up during that period, I know that I have no other place to be right now, and I don't have to get up and I don't have to do anything about it. I can just be with the sensation as a sensation, regardless of whether it feels good or bad.
So you're not trying to get rid of a bad sensation.
Exactly.
You're trying to stay with your uncomfortableness.
Exactly. I'm just being with it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if I have a sense of impending doom, I should just stick with it?
Totally just be with the sense of impending doom. Look, we're all going to die. We've been through this, right? We're not trying to avoid dying. We're not trying to suppress dying.
Dying
is
great.
We're not trying to resist it.
We should celebrate death.
We're not denying that we're going to... Look, we should celebrate.
It should be just as much of a celebration as birth. I think a lot of people a lot of cultures take it seriously, and it becomes like a period of mourning, and it becomes this depressing thing. And yeah, it is sad. It is depressing. It is that, but it isn't only that. And I think that I think there's a lot of good information about there that perhaps we can talk about in a future episode about death practices and new types of funeral practices, and like how people are kind of changing the way that we think about our end of life changes.
Yeah.
You know, but
and you had just written an entire paper devoted to death meditation. Is that true?
I did.
Yeah.
I did. My research partner, William Colachico, and I, who will become a guest lecturer on this podcast in a future episode. He doesn't know that yet, but he doesn't have a choice. He and I wrote a paper on obscure Buddhist death meditation practices that are being practiced here in Florida, just 10 minutes outside of Disney World, which is pretty remarkable considering that these practices are normally only used for monks.
Yes.
And not normally taught to lay people.
Not to mention that it's located, 10 minutes outside of what's supposed to be the happiest place on earth?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's just like you said, you can't have happiness without knowing what its opposite is.
Yeah.
You know, you can't have a roller coaster that only goes up. But yeah, so we talked about unattractiveness of the body meditation, body contemplation, and death contemplation, and understanding like, hey, one day you're gonna die, and if you're comfortable with that, it makes living so much more vibrant, because then you don't spend all of your time running away from the fact that that's going to happen and trying to distract yourself from it. That's I think that's a big one. Could spend some time on that.
Yeah.
But,
and speaking of future topics for episodes, if you have suggestions for topics that we can cover, or if you'd like to send us fan mail, please do so. You can comment in the Facebook Live video, or you can contact us at mindfulnessofdoom@gmail.com. That's mindfulnessofdoom@gmail.com. Right on. Well,
we have a couple other questions. Let's shoot through those real quick, and then we'll move on.
Okay.
Mark Smith asks, what have you noticed about the mind-body connection?
The mind-body connection.
Yeah, what's the
Do you want me to
mind-
take this one?
Yeah, sure. What's the mind-body connection?
Sure.
You tell me.
Yeah, I haven't felt this mysterious mind-body connection, nor have I seen it with my own eyes.
Have you felt that the mind and the body are separate things?
I have not felt that.
So they're the same thing.
I feel that,
So you've never felt,
but I don't feel that either.
You've never felt a disambiguation between the way you feel and the way you act?
Of course I have. But that, of course, doesn't mean that the two things are separate or intertwined. Because if they were intertwined, it would imply that they're separate. But if they were one thing, why do we have two labels for them? So then we can start to get in this big roundabout conversation about, okay, what's mind, what's body? Look, the fact of the matter is most people associate the mind with the organ located inside the cranium that's called the brain. And there's so much brain research and neuroscience being parsed out these days that tends to be what most people focus on when they think about the mind. The way that I see the mind and the body, I see it as all one big interconnected system. And I could take that a step further and say that, well, the mind and the body are really no separate from anything else that exists in this universe either. So if I'm thinking something in my mind, let's say, I'm going to have a feeling that's correlated to it in the body, that is then going to produce more thoughts in the mind that's going to produce more feelings. And these thoughts and feelings are going to compel me into action, which is going to move something in a location that appears to be outside of me.
I think it's a good way of putting it. I think from the Buddhist perspective, one of the things that separates them from other religions of India and other belief structures of that part of the world is that they don't believe in a self. They don't believe in a center core that is permanently unchanging. I mean, we could get into a big debate about whether or not they believe in a soul, but for all intents and purposes, they don't believe that any one part of you is permanent and yet that you're forever changing. So for them, the answer to that question of the mind-body connection is that that it's really not an issue. It's not really a question. It's something that people struggle with for sure, and they spend a lot of time trying to get people to realize something more fundamental about themselves, which is that they don't have one.
Yeah. Well, and it's a fallacy that I feel is created by the nuance of language. If I assign a label to something called the mind, and I assign a label to something called the body, inherently I feel they must be two separate things, but yet I feel that they should be related in some way. So because I have this fallacy of language, I could spend my entire life doing research and studying how the two things that I made up are actually related to one another.
Wait, are you trying to tell me that all my academic research was all for nothing?
How much did you spend on that?
$80,000.
You still paying that off?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So that was all for naught?
No. Did you have fun? Would you do it again?
Yeah, I'd do it again. If Dr. Katz would come out of retirement, I would do it again.
What's our next question?
I want to kind of harp on that for a second, because you talked about language. And I was a language teacher for 7 years. I taught English and Japanese, 4 years of it in Japan, teaching English. And then I came back to Miami, and I taught at the English Language Institute at FIU for a while. And I find that using English terminology is really helpful in kind of discussing these things, because when we talk about mind, body, these are nouns. These are things that we attach meaning to. But if you come at it from the perspective that everything changes and that nothing is static, everything is falling apart, everything is evolving and growing and building complexity and tearing itself down, then over a long enough timeline, anything that you give a name, any noun that you give a name, will eventually no longer be that thing. Like there's a trash can in the corner of the room right now, and I could use it as a bin to put stuff in.
There's nothing in it. It's safe.
Good. Nice clean trash can. So like I could take this trash can, and I can put stuff in it and make it a trash can. Or I can turn it upside down and sit on it, and then it's a seat. Or I can put it on my head, and then it's a hat. So on our first podcast, I've already put a trash can over my head.
Well done, sir.
Yeah. But, so, the thing is not its use. Because there's so much more to that object than what it is called. The thing is not really a noun. In 100 years, that trash can will itself be a piece of trash, and it will be breaking down somewhere. And once you tear it into enough pieces, you don't call it a trash can anymore. You call it junk, or it's pieces of plastic. And then give it another 1,000 years or 20,000 years, and it will be bits of sand and grit. So continuing to use a noun to define its nature is kind of, it doesn't really get the point across. So instead, if you want to bring it back to the self and humans and individuals, the cosmology of that understanding is that you are not a noun. You are a verb. You are not a human being. You are a human doing. You are a collection of processes and changes, and the person you are who's sitting here having this podcast with me is not the same person who came into the room a couple hours ago to set up the audio equipment. It's that you have changed and grown, and trying to overcome this idea of permanence, overcoming this idea of yourself being a static, unchanging entity, helps to understand the world around you. It helps to put your mind and your body into an understandable form, and it helps to keep you from suffering when one of those things changes, but your definition of that thing has not yet changed, and who you think you are and who you actually are different things. It's not change that causes suffering. It's the resistance to change that causes suffering.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the linguistic phenomena that we use, all these nouns that we assign to things, when something actually does change and it's inevitable that something will change, and the noun that we have for it no longer suits the thing that we thought it was, then it creates suffering. Imagine, you may be able to relate to this as somebody who is interested in personal growth or spiritual growth. When you change and grow yourself, think about what the people in your life do as they're trying to relate to you. I remember when it was funny when I first decided to become vegan, and
oh, you're one of those.
Yeah, one of those. Yeah, it was something that I wanted to try, and this was about 5 years ago when I started. I went home to visit my family, and they had a whole big dinner set up, and I wasn't eating most of the food. I was eating the vegetables, and my grandmother goes, "Oh, what's wrong? Or why are you not eating?" And I said, "Oh, well, I'm eating. I'm just having the vegetables." Grandma, I decided that I'm going to be vegan, and her response was, "Oh my God, what did we do wrong?" Because to her, assigning a different label to me, for her, changed me as a person. It meant something different to her about me than it used to mean. And she didn't know how to relate to me. And then she decided, well, let me make that about me messing something up in your growing process.
Yeah.
And for me, that was incredibly confusing. What do you mean? What, you didn't do anything wrong? I'm just changing the way that I eat. Just
but
to
she
see
comes
what
at
it's
it
like.
from this angle of of herself being the impetus or responsible for someone else's self.
Right, and it was almost as though I had joined a cult.
Yeah, it's like the definition of selfishness.
Yeah, and so this
capital S selfishness.
This is the process that happens when a label or a noun no longer fits what we once thought it fit. We grapple with this reality change. We have to then reassociate or re-relate to our current reality in a new way, and that's a growing process for ourselves. As other people grow and change, so do we. Everything is connected in that way.
You want to take one more question?
Let's take one more question.
Okay,
We've got time for just one more quick question.
All right, so let's answer the question from Ernest Ivan, who asks, any tips on how to remember to slow down and reflect?
Tips on remembering to slow down and reflect.
I'll take this one.
Go ahead.
Or I'll start with this one. All right, so Ivan, tips on how to remember. Well, I think first of all, it's important to understand that there's two different skill sets involved with practicing anything. You have recognition skills and production skills. Your ability to recognize something is one skill set. So, for example, you're using flashcards to study a language. You're constantly remembering by something prompting your memory. That's one way of using skill sets. So reading and listening are both recognition skill sets. But production skill sets like writing and speaking rely on a different way of the brain recalling that information. Instead of practicing recognizing the information, you have to practice recalling the information, bringing it to the forefront without a trigger. So if you want to get better at remembering how to slow down and reflect, I know this answer is going to seem a little bit redundant, but practice remembering to slow down and reflect. The more often you remind yourself to slow down and reflect, the more often you are going to have it come up naturally. It's like you're developing a new skill set by practicing it. And I mean, of course, you could put little sticky notes around your apartment, or in your car, or little reminders on your phone that pop up every once in a while to help you keep focused. I have a browser add-on to Chrome called Momentum that a friend of mine, Christina Robertson, recommended, and it's been very helpful. And every time you open a new tab, it sends you to a to-do list that it will ask you, what is your main focus for today? And the idea is that you're supposed to, fill it in, and you have a little to-do list on there, and you can check off the things that you do. And it helps you have this plan to keep you focused. And every time you start to get distracted by opening up a new tab to go check your mail or to go to check Facebook or something, it stops you. It adds a little barrier to just remind you, hey, you got stuff to do today, and it's really useful. So my answer to you is, if you want to slow down and reflect more, do it more. It's like, if you want to get better at swimming, get in the pool and keep swimming. You're already doing it. If you're already asking the question, it means that's already something that you're spending your time thinking on. And if you continue to do that you will get better at it. It will come more and more naturally.
Yeah. I have this really interesting tool that I began using several months ago, and I had been journaling for a long time. I'd always used journals for reflecting, and I found a journal.
I normally use mirrors for that.
Yeah, mirrors are also good for reflecting, I agree. I had found this interesting journal by a company called Best Self that incorporates in one spread of your journal your daily gratitude, your full schedule, your notes for the day, your main goal, 3 important tasks, your big wins, and your lessons learned. So that every morning when I wake up, I plan my day and do my morning gratitude. And throughout the day, I take my notes. And then at the end of the day, before I go to bed, I celebrate my little wins for the day. And I do my evening gratitude journaling.
Oh.
And
is it helpful?
Extraordinarily helpful. So if you read any of there are several there are several self-help books by various authors that say, oh, you should do gratitude, or just clearly outline what your goals are for the day. This book brings everything together into one thing, and it takes me about 10 minutes a day, saves me close to an hour. And then when I'm finished with that, I do my morning meditation for another 10 to 20 minutes, and that saves me yet another hour to 2 hours in my day. At that point, I clearly know what all of my goals are, and my mind is so sharp and focused that I don't get distracted doing any of the things that I know that I don't need to be doing.
Right, because you have a plan.
Right, and
that's basically the practice, is write down what you want to do, and then keep checking back on the thing you wrote down.
Right, and then I don't have to store all of that in my head, because my head is not good for that sort of thing. My head is good for just being and living life.
The human brain is not a good hard drive.
No, it's a terrible hard drive.
It's a much better processor.
You ever try to remember something that happened yesterday? Oh my goodness.
Just on a tangent here, I want to rant about something for a second. So,
sure.
So I've been an educator for 12 years. I am a teacher. That's what I do. I am kind of like, if you really want to know the core of my being, think of me as that kid in preschool who really likes show and tell, like constantly bringing stuff in and showing other people. That's really all I am. I'm just a giant preschooler, and I learned something that I think is interesting. I feel like I'm a pretty good discretionary consumer. I feel like I have some level of taste where it comes to music, or of course that's debatable, but the point is that I like showing people the things that I have found to be useful. And there's a lot of garbage out there. There's a lot of stuff that isn't worth your time. But as far as education goes, I think most people come at it thinking that they are given information, that they are going to class to have the professor just hand them all of the information and say, here, I am teaching you, I am giving you, and I think that's total BS. I think that teaching is not really a thing. I don't think that teaching exists. I think that guiding is real, but learning is the only real skill set. You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink. If the student does not want to engage with the material, there's nothing a teacher can do. A teacher is a guide. A good teacher makes themselves progressively useless. They show you where the information is, show you where the best pools of knowledge are. It's the student's job to drink. So when you go to class and you study for that test, and you study for weeks on end to get a B on a test, and you get all upset about it, and then 3 days later you don't remember anything that you did on the test, and you think, well, what was the purpose of that? The purpose wasn't to get you to remember everything. The purpose was to teach you the process, how to be able to access that information. So in the future, when you've forgotten it, you know a process. You know how to retrieve that information should you need it. You're not going to be able to memory recall any of the things 5 years after college. That's not what it's for. That's not how education works. And I think people get it backwards. They think that they're supposed to be given stuff. And this is where, again, discipline and self-discipline. Bring it back around. You got to have that self-discipline. Got to teach yourself how to learn. There you go. I'm done with my rant.
All right.
My rant on education.
And look, I'm 100% with you. As a teacher myself, I believe in empowerment. That I can...
And if it doesn't work for you, just remember that you're all going to die and it doesn't matter anyway, so just go live life.
Yeah, you know what? You're right. Screw it.
I think that's what we should do. We should just, say screw it and just go live life.
Yeah, go live life. Learn what you want to learn. Do what you want to do. Don't hurt other people, please.
Yeah.
And most importantly, be happy and be free.
Yeah, it's a choice. It's more of a choice than most people think it is, and sometimes you got to get your head around it. But just remember that if you can't, if you're having trouble, just remember the words of our sponsors, the impending sense of doom, which is hovering over all of us, causing anxiety, and it's important to live with it. So, impending sense of doom. Thank you for sponsoring this podcast.
Much appreciated. Thank you.
Also, we're also sponsored by Uncomfortable Sensations.
Uncomfortable Sensations has been with us since the beginning. Actually, even before we pushed the record button. So thank you guys so much for giving us that extra bit of motivation that we needed to really see this through.
Yeah, we really appreciate it. Thank you guys so much for listening to our first podcast of Mindfulness of Doom. It's been a pleasure. We hope to do this often. And as we get better at it and you want to send us more questions, feel free to do so. And thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. We invite you to like, subscribe, and rate our podcast on iTunes and wherever podcasts of real quality can be found. Have suggestions, music, or artwork for the show? Want to sponsor our podcast? Find our contact page and links to the items we talked about in this episode at www.mindfulnessofdoom.com.
This podcast is recorded at the Center for Social Change in Miami, Florida. It is written, edited, and recorded by Brian Lemmerman and Cory Hardacre. Our music is by Pallettown and can be found at soundcloud.com/Pallettown. All poorly thought out opinions are ours. Nothing you hear in this podcast should be construed as professional medical advice. Go see a therapist, all of you.